So here's my breakdown of the season 4 premiere of The Walking Dead, titled 30 Days Without an Accident, and this episode here focused a lot on Rick obviously trying to keep things very, very peaceful. He tried very, very hard to keep things peaceful at the prison. It seemed like things were going to go good there, obviously before a lot of bad things happened later on this season. And honestly, looking back at this premiere, it's been a while since I've actually watched this episode, and this episode's really great, and it really does dive into Rick Grimes' mindset specifically on trying to bring back the old world in any way. There was a certain point after this where Rick, I think, just accepted the fact that things were never really going to be the same. Obviously, we saw in later seasons and even in The Ones Who Live, like things eventually became somewhat normal, but it is still different. Like it's different now. You can't really go back. And this was the episode here where Rick, I think, really tried to make things go back to the way things used to be, like really tried to. He refused to do things, that a lot of people were doing, I guess, in the apocalypse, and he just tried to live life the way that he used to. And so, yeah, I want to break down this episode, talk about, some of the more bigger moments in this episode. After this, I will be doing episode 2 of season 4, so definitely make sure to be a subscriber if you want to get all my breakdowns. I'm going to be trying to get through all of season 4, besides episode 14, because I already did a review of that on the channel. I'll go from episode 13 to 15, but yeah, I'm watching all of season 4 right now, so if you want to get all my breakdowns for season 4, or all my episode breakdowns, then definitely make sure to be a subscriber. So this episode here starts off quite a while after Rick and his group defeated Woodbury, and more specifically the governor. At this point here, Rick was trying to make things as peaceful as possible. He didn't want to be a leader anymore. There was this council now that was formed, and everyone basically voted on this and that, and Rick did not really want to be a part of the council. Rick just wanted to live a normal life. And so that's where the whole farmer Rick thing comes from, right? I think Chris Hardwick actually said it first, right? On Talking Dead back in the day, from what I remember anyways. And yeah, I mean, that's literally Rick's story here in this episode, is he's trying to live that life. And he thinks being a farmer is, a really great example for his son, Carl. And obviously, I mean, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Doing things like that will actually, like that's a positive influence for Carl. But Herschel in this episode is even pushing Rick to be a little more, cautious, and he questions Rick constantly and is like, you can't do this and that, like you got to do this. And that's coming from Herschel, who also is a farmer as well, who is teaching Rick everything, right? And so Rick does have a hard time, I think, accepting the fact that the world outside their walls is the same thing as, what's inside. Like it's all the same thing. And obviously he's trying to ignore it all and make things as good as possible. But when you go outside those walls, things are different, and you need to be careful. What I actually really like about this episode is that you see a lot of walkers starting to build up around the fences, and I really like that aspect to it because it does create this threat that, they're always going to have to deal with that, because in season 3 they dealt with that quite a bit, but I would say season 4, especially because we know where this is going, the walkers always being around the fences and stuff, or the walls, it shows how safe they are, and they do have people out there clearing the walkers and whatnot, so like there is that. We actually do meet a new character named Bob, who is one of my favorite characters of all time, like for sure. He's in my top 10. I don't know why. I've just always loved that character, Bob. His death was so sad, but yeah, this was the first episode that we saw him in, and he wants to go on a supply run with them. Daryl has gotten a lot more popular, which is kind of interesting because I feel like, and I remember thinking that at the time, that this was just a part of the story, because around this time, Daryl was getting very, very popular just, in general with a lot of the fans and all of that. And I feel like that's why that was added to the story, because Daryl was becoming very, very popular. And I remember around this time, I felt very annoyed by that, because I always liked Daryl since season 2. Like, around season 2 is when he became like my favorite character, and for me it was just kind of like, I don't know, I understood Daryl, and I think as time went on, obviously I just got more and more annoyed because a lot of other fans were starting to realize how popular he was, which eventually around this point here, like Daryl was just very, very popular. And I still remember actually watching the season 4 premiere for the first time and seeing everyone's reaction to Daryl in general. Like this was the moment here, like this season specifically in season 4 is where Daryl became like a fan favorite everywhere, and really I feel like cemented the fact that he wasn't gonna die on The Walking Dead, because he became such a popular character, right? Like you can't kill off a character like Daryl. So yeah, but in terms of how life is for everybody, everything seems very manageable. Rick is trying to act like everything's fine, and Carl wants to, well, he wants Carl to act like a kid. Carl I think is trying to do what he has to do for Rick, but I think disagrees on the whole thing. I mean, obviously we know later on in season 4, we literally hear Carl say that, like, you just wanted to play farmer, you just wanted to do this and that, you ignored everything and you caused all these people to die kind of thing, right? Like Carl really got upset. This episode also has a lot of Herschel in it, and it's a really incredible episode. I feel like, I mean, obviously everyone knows that, like, the first half of season 4, because Herschel's not in the second half of season 4, but the first half of season 4 here is the best Herschel story. Like, it's the best story with the character, and it was nice to go back and rewatch this episode. And obviously I'm going to be watching the next couple of episodes, and episode 5 I believe is Herschel's like most iconic episode, and it's really like he was a role model for everybody there. Like, everyone in Rick's group looked up to Herschel because obviously he just sort of knew a lot more than everyone else, and it was just, yeah, he was their role model, right? But Rick does have the 3 questions in this episode here. He actually that idea is introduced here. It's something that comes up a lot later on in the series, and it's interesting because obviously it's very hard to trust anyone. And I was thinking about it at this point here. They couldn't really trust the governor. They couldn't trust a lot of people in season 3, but all of that just kind of happened like randomly. Like, they all kind of knew that they couldn't trust the governor, right? Before that, it was the prison and whatnot. So at this point here, they haven't gotten to the point where they know that they can't completely trust anybody, because after the governor, after the prison falls and everything, when they're on the road and they experience all of that before they eventually get to Alexandria, which is a very long time, like, that is the point where Rick is just completely gone, right? And so it's interesting to see before all of that happens there, this like almost transition to that, right? Because Rick has these 3 questions here that he asks everybody, like, how many walkers have you killed? How many people have you killed? Why? Like, it's such a great way to understand everything. Like, if you just ask any character those 3 questions, just think of all of their answers specifically and what that says about them, right? Really, I feel like what you're looking for in all of those questions is, can you contribute to the community? Can you help all of us out? Because everyone has done bad things, but we just want to see if you're able to recognize that, right? Lizzie is also in this episode, and I just wanted to point that out because she has a line in this episode where she says that they're not dead, like referring to walkers. I just did a video on that the other day, like, what if Lizzie saw a whisperer, and so that's why she believed the walkers weren't actually dead? They're just different, sort of thing. And yeah, obviously Carl gets upset here, but yeah, just a really interesting theory, just a really interesting idea, I feel like, to, you know, just sort of discuss. But Daryl, Michonne, and everyone else in the group, there's actually quite a bit of characters there in that group that went on the supply run. Walkers eventually collapse through the roof. A helicopter falls down to the character named Zach actually dies. Really insane sequence. And I remember the first time I watched it, I wasn't a fan of it. And that's what's kind of fun about doing these reviews or breakdowns of these older episodes, because I'm remembering how I felt about these moments when I first watched it. And I don't know what it is about it. The CGI just didn't look that great. And I think just the way the whole sequence sort of played out, I just wasn't a fan of how everything played out. And it just kind of felt like the room was too dark and you just really couldn't see a lot. But looking back at it now, I mean, I think the sequence is all right. I really don't have an issue with it. Yeah, the CGI, you definitely notice it. It's not the greatest, but I think the walkers collapsing through the roof and everything, just really cool visuals, I would say. Going back to the 3 questions that Rick asked that woman, obviously it's eventually revealed that the woman tricks Rick, and then she says she wants to be a walker because she can't do the things required to survive in this new world. Like, she says something like, you can't go back or something like that. Rick eventually asks her the 3 questions. He is very sad about her death, and I would say overall that this storyline here was perfect for who Rick was trying to become. And I do wonder if Rick thinks about her sometimes, you know, like, Rick was really trying to hold on to the old world, and after this, I think he still kept trying, but it was definitely like, this was a lesson that he learned, that you can't really do that. Like, it is very hard. And obviously Herschel's death, I think, really cemented that. And everything Rick went through afterwards, like, yeah, he was fighting to survive. So, yeah, just a really incredible scene in general. And I do wonder if Rick looks back and thinks of that moment where, you know, like, that was the moment where I really did let go of the fact that the old world's not coming back. And I mean, obviously there was moments later on as well. I mean, I think in Alexandria, well, for the most part in Alexandria, Rick didn't really go back to pretending that the new world isn't a thing. Like, Rick did try to make things as they once were before the apocalypse, but it wasn't the same. Obviously, he always knew that like it was never going to go back to normal, but it's just like a new normal, right? Because the way things were in Alexandria, he was still helping out, you know, he was still clearing walkers, he was still doing all of that. And I just like the line, "You don't get to come back," because I think that really stuck with Rick. Like, I even think to this day, Rick still thinks about that. In terms of other storylines happening in this episode, I mean, Carol's reading books, or she's pretending to be reading books. She's actually teaching all of them about weapons. Carl finds out at the end, and so I guess we'll see, you know, where that goes in the next couple of episodes. Everyone makes it back. Daryl tells Beth about Zach. That's where we see the whole 30 days without an accident. The title of the episode is a reference to that. And at the end, we see that one of the characters is sick, and that starts that whole storyline of the sickness spreading throughout the prison. And yeah, some really amazing stuff here. So this episode, honestly, really great. What's interesting about it is that, first of all, it was directed by Greg Nicotero, so there's that. It was written by Scott Gimple, which is very interesting because this is Scott Gimple's first season as the showrunner, and you can just kind of see with the dialogue that it really does remind you anyways of, you know, dialogue that Gimple writes, right? Like a lot of that like philosophical stuff where like it means this and that, and characters don't necessarily have like real, you know, discussions on things. A lot of it is in like riddles. Like the dialogue feels like there's constant riddles. And yeah, it's just, I mean, you could kind of see it here in this episode. Because I think before this, I don't know if Scott Gimple was involved in The Walking Dead, or I think he was. But he was a producer, I believe. A producer and a writer. So yeah, just really interesting. But yeah, anyways, I'm gonna leave it here. Definitely post your thoughts down below on this episode. Hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.